dog in your life is thinking? Well, join me, Liz Murdoch, animal communicator, talking with the dogs and finding out what dogs want people in their lives to know and understand. I've spent my life talking and listening to animals. So if you consider yourself a dog person or just happen to have a dog, I'm here to help you learn how to talk or listen to the dogs in your life. I chat with people too, sharing stories and tips on exactly how animal communication or being a dog whisperer makes an impact at home or when working with the dogs. So welcome to Talking with the Dogs podcast, a place where we uncover exactly what dogs want us to know and celebrate that every dog has a story. This episode is brought to you by Noble Pet Foods. No nonsense, no bull. Go to noblefoods.com, use promo code DOGTALK15, and they'll deliver dog food to your house with no bull. Hi, I'm Liz Murdoch here, back with Talking with the Dogs. I have a guest today I'm very excited about. My dogs are excited about. They're barking in the background. Brooke Newman, you are a memoirist. You are called, but in reading your book, I have it right here, Not Always Home Before Dark, I thought it was funny that you're a memoirist because it's really all about Cajun, and right. Cajun steals the show from you. So I just wanted to share that for listeners, is that she is a memoirist. She's written the very popular book, The Little Turn, that I looked up and is still quite popular throughout the world. And she has a new book that just came out about Cajun, her dog who was rescued from the Aspen shelter, came from Hurricane Katrina. So Cajun has quite a story to tell. But what I love about your writing about Cajun is that it's not about Cajun's poor story about Katrina. And it just is a great example for anyone listening who needs a good book to read. It's about what happens when a dog is adopted and is allowed to just flourish. And that's exactly what you did, both in Cajun's life and in telling Cajun's story. So welcome, Brooke. You. I'm so glad to have you. How long has your book been out?
Not very long, probably now just about 4 weeks, but so it's fun. It's always, you never know what's going to happen when you have a book come out.
It's very entertaining. You wrote your book several years after he passed away, and you were coming out of a time where you had written another book, and I guess you didn't feel quite like writing much, and you were sort of traumatized by that experience you've shared. And I want to know what prompted you to finally write this book about Cajun.
You know, that's a great question. I actually started writing before Cajun passed away, because a lot of the things that happened with Cajun, for Cajun, by Cajun, were just so funny and interesting and somewhat unusual that people would ask me, you know, you've got to write these stories, you've got to put this down. And as a writer, I kept writing, even though I had a difficult time with the book before I did Not Always Home Before Dark, because it was a big deal book, and I tend to be a very private person, and it was a little more than I could handle. Anyway, and Cajun and I had a lot of conversations about those years when it was so tough. And so I started writing the stories before he passed away. And then actually when I went through that time when he was older and sick, you know, I was kind of paralyzed by it too. So it took a while after he died that I said, you know, I actually felt it was a privilege to kind of have Cajun ever in my life. Right. And that if I could shepherd his story, because it was emotional, but he was he had this great sense of humor alongside being a very serious dog. I mean, he, like everyone and every animal, wants to have security and love, but he had this ridiculous sense of humor, and so I wanted that to come through, for all the people who both knew him and never knew him, because there are people who have dogs and love dogs, as you know. We all have great stories about things our dogs did. It's not as if Cajun story is unique. And that's what made it more important for me to tell, because it's not unique. It's something we all share, like these ridiculous stories that dogs get us into as people. So that, I mean, that was it. I just felt I have to tell this story. So
you don't really go into detail on what he needed. You go into detail about his life once he recovered.
True.
And that is so huge, which many people want to hold on to those rescue details. And you allowed him to put it sort of on the bookshelf and not make it the whole story of his life. It's like, that happened. It was obviously awful because he's haunted by when there's storms. You do share that in the book, what happens when storms come. So he didn't like storms, but you still allowed him to live the life that honored who he was. For instance, and it was sort of in the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, because he likes to wander. And you allowed him. I was like, why didn't you just put him on a leash? And
I know.
I live in California where there's leash laws, and it's like, get your dog and all of that. And so what was that like, letting him wander in a community, and how the community took that? I mean, you talk a bit about the book, but it's still like, wow. Or you wait for him for hours to come back.
I know, hours and hours. That, it's fascinating the way you put that question together, because I think most people, when you rescue a dog, you wonder what they went through before. I mean, you think,
comes up all the time.
And you wonder which maybe you have more insight into, because you have an ability to understand them in ways, but we try to figure it out as best we can. But at the end of the day, we all know that what they need the most is that security and that love. And for me, Cajun had such a need to wander. I mean, yes, I could have had him on a leash all the time. And as I said in the book, I'm horrible about caging animals. Like, zoos are not a place that make me happy, unless it's the San Diego Zoo. I have a difficult time seeing birds caged. I know that there are a lot of birds that are really happy, in households, but it doesn't work for me. I have a very difficult time with caged or chained animals. I just do. That's me. That's my problem. It wasn't Cajun's problem. And maybe he would have been safer, but I don't know, better off, because there was a love we had, and I let him do this, and thank God he never got hurt or stolen, which obviously I worried about all the time. But Aspen is a very dog friendly town, and there are leash laws, not everywhere. Like there are places you can hike or walk without a dog on a leash. So having lived here so long, I mean, I've been here over 50 years. And when I first came, there were no leash laws. I mean, there were sometimes animal control people around, and I lived in different areas. I had horses and dogs, and there was never, there were no leash laws. So I kind of brought that into my bailiwick for Cajun. And when because I've had dogs, I've never had a dog that had such a need to wander. And
it seemed to work for him and everybody else. It sounds like, I don't want to give things away, but the people who reported back, they all loved it.
Yeah. Well,
be part of their
he
pack.
made, he made friends. He was very Southern. He was like he loved a good party. He loved music.
Hmm.
And as much as he had all these issues, he, he was in a bizarre way very engaging and outgoing. And then he wanted to go home. And then it was, I'm done with that party. I'm going home. So it did work for him. I mean, there were, thank God nothing ever happened. I would have such guilt. I never had, as I said, I never had a dog that wandered so much and
Hmm.
had such a need. Like you opened the door and he was gone.
Yeah.
Um, and he never, I don't live near big highways where there's
Hmm.
traffic. So, and he was obviously savvy. He knew where he was going.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Well, I definitely got the sense of that because by once I got past that part, I think because I live in LA
Yeah.
where there's and I just did another interview with someone about her lost dog and finding it and what people go
Oh,
through. I work with lost dog groups, so it took me a while to sort of
yeah.
shift, but once I got past that, I was like, oh my gosh, and then what happened? And it was clear that he was living the life that was his flourishing life. And it made me think about, I almost wanted to have a disclaimer, not everyone should do
Yeah.
this at home with their dog,
No, I agree. And I
but
had
it,
guilt at writing it that way. I mean, I thought maybe I shouldn't tell people, maybe I shouldn't admit that I let him have his wandering ways, it would be better. But the reality was that if you're going to tell the story, either you tell it honestly
right.
or you don't tell it. And that's my flaw. It is a flaw that I walk around with the dogs off leash, so
Yeah.
much. The dogs I have now are never more than a few feet, but they're to criticize me about this would be correct. I get that, which I say in the book. No, it is true. Yes, it is true that I should not have let him wander so much. He could have gotten run over. He could have gotten
Well, I don't
stolen.
know if I feel like you shouldn't have. I mean, in our traditional world, no, you shouldn't have. But in sort of in like a perfect world, you did exactly the right thing. That's the conflict of me
Yeah,
thinking like, oh, what are we doing having our dogs caged?
yeah,
But your dogs are also, trained. Well, he didn't come when you called, but he came back.
right.
It is a very interesting story and I'm glad you told it, and I wouldn't want to shut it down. If anything, I want people to read it because it does show, you know what happens when we honor who our dogs really are. He may have been miserable and not lived nearly as long. He may have been depressed. Who knows? If he'd
Right,
been, home, you know most of the day with an hour walk in the morning and a 20-minute walk in the evening, which a lot of dogs, that's all they
right,
ever.
right.
So we don't really know. And I certainly don't want to judge you. I wanted a
No, no,
question
no. I get
like,
that.
okay, good. Because I do live in LA and leash laws and people freak out about that kind of thing. So I think for me, I thought it was interesting
You
discussion.
know, when I first got Cajun, obviously, I wondered, as I said before, where he'd been, what had happened. But there were certain things in relation to this, letting him have his way. He never scratched on a door. He never barked.
Hmm.
I felt he had lived on the streets. He had scars around his eyes. He came to us with a collar that had spikes on it, and this was the sweetest dog ever.
Yeah,
And I felt that he had lived a street life.
he might have. Yeah.
I don't know that for sure,
Yeah.
but that's what I thought, and that he had never been confined. And so he had been through such a trauma that when I first fostered him, I I didn't want to over traumatize him by saying, now you're confined again. He did not do well confined.
you decided to keep him, but you still understood who he was. You weren't trying to make him into some other, oh, I love this
Right.
dog, he reminds me of someone else, or, oh, I want him to be my running partner. You
Right.
accepted him. And that is what I think so many people need to either learn or remember, that we can't make our dogs be something that it doesn't work as well if we try and
Right.
make them into something who their essence is not. And people get into, challenges with their animals when they try and, say, you're going to be the best friend to my kids. And then the dog doesn't want to, or you're going to be a dog for my daughter, and the dog bonds with the mother.
That's a
So,
fascinating point that you're making. It is, because we do that as parents too,
right.
trying to make a child be whom he or she isn't.
Yeah.
And Cajun was another child, as all my dogs are.
Right.
And he wasn't going to be what he didn't want to be. But I think that's a really important point you're making. I really do, both
Thank
in
you.
terms of this story, but I think it's more than a fascinating point. Like, not all dogs want to be with small children or with big people or men or women.
Right.
They have their own. So what you're saying is, I think it's a really good point.
Thank you. Well, you highlight that in your book. That's how you allowed Cajun to live his life. The other thing you talk about in the book is about the time in his senior years where you spent a lot of time on the lazy boy chair and all of that. And it made me think of people who say, get the dog off the couch and all of that. And again, you honored what it was that your dog needed, but also what you felt you needed to, just deal with that life transition.
Right.
So,
No, yes, that's true. I mean, I think the most ludicrous, the story about him being going to the top of the mountain after the snowstorm,
right.
and coming down on that gondola,
Right.
when everybody was so excited, and I was just dying with the thought of how much it was going to cost me to
Right. You had
repair the
assumed
interior.
something.
But I was also angry at him. Like, how could you do this to me? This is going to cost me $10,000-$15,000 maybe. At the same
Right.
time, like a lost child. Oh, thank God he's coming down on the gondola. How could you do this to me? Oh, thank God he's coming.
Right.
But it was such an endearing. It was a turning point, that event. Because
in what way?
Well, because he had been everywhere. He had been in a swimming pool in the middle of town, and then I had looked, as I always did, for hours and hours and couldn't find him, and I was angry and I was upset. And then when I got the call that he was at the top of the mountain, you're relieved, but you're angry.
Right.
And you're frightened, and it just kind of put together everything that, because it was maybe 3 years after I'd first, or 2.5 years after I'd first met Cajun, and he had come into my life, that happened. And I had spent so many, as I said, hours and hours looking for him. And this was a turning point, because it was everything. As I said, I was angry. I was happy. I was elated that he had made so many friends. And I was, again, angry. What are you thinking going on?
Right. It's like a parent, very much.
Yeah. And he was so welcomed by the community and by other people, because he both needed love, but he was lovable. And that was the essence of it. That was the essence of Cajun.
Yeah.
He was so lovable, even though he had so much damage.
Yeah, I think that's another one of those, the threads of the story that makes it more than just a dog story, is that, he wasn't a person. And you talk about that, and how you did not view him as another person. You knew he was a dog. But it just shows, just like people, we have our flaws. And by embracing both, it just shows the love of what the human experience of loving a dog, why we so attached, because it is like loving a person, the good and the bad.
But what do
So,
you think? What I'd like to know your thoughts. I personally have conversations with my dogs all the time, whether
uh-huh.
they're out loud or in my mind.
Okay.
With Cajun, even more so.
Yes.
Um, I mean, about everything, the most intimate details of my life, I would share with Cajun.
Okay.
What do you think? I'd like to know how much do they get? I know they get when you're sad or angry, but what do you think they get?
So I think it depends on the dog, just like a person. I think that from my experience, I have understood dogs since I was 5 years old. And I, don't really understand it. I just do it. And I feel very called to advocate for them. And I tune in. So I'm going to, like with Cajun, I think his biggest thing was the wisdom, and that's from like tuning into him now, whatever it is I can get, is that there was this wisdom as a sounding board, and that when you would talk to him, I get a sense that his initial response would be to put it back on you, like any good therapist might do, and say, well, what do you think? And that's probably what you needed, more than an actual solution. And whereas
Mhm.
some dogs might be like, I don't know, but let's go for a walk, because that's what
Right.
some people need. And I think that, there are people who think that animals are here to teach us. I don't think they're here to teach us. I think they can teach us just like anybody else can, if we're open. And sometimes we're open to
Huh.
more.
Right.
In conversations with dogs, sometimes it is just we want someone to talk to, and we're not opening up. Like I can talk to one of my dogs or a dog and say, so what do you think of this book? Should I read it? And I might just want to talk, just I'm being flip, just
Yeah.
sort of like, ha
Right.
ha. But that might be satisfying enough for me. But if I tune in, my whole process that I do and that I teach, and I really want to know, and I'm open to any answer without preconceptions, which I think my sense from how you describe your relationship, you did more of that with Cajun later in life.
Right.
And I think that when we start looking for an answer on how much do they understand,
Right.
one, it depends on the dog, and two, I think they understand a lot, and I don't know why. I think, it's a controversial question. Is that just sort of like an energetic thing? Maybe. I don't
Right.
really know. I'm just happy to do it. Um, but to answer your question, yes, I think that they know a lot more. And it's just like, there's a lot more in this world that we don't understand. We have our moments of
Yeah.
flow where it's like, oh, and then, like you wrote a book, you weren't happy with how it all played out, but you took time
Right.
off with it, and you wrote about Cajun, maybe not realizing that this was going to come.
Right.
But we don't understand, but it's all sort of good. You're in this pandemic now and you're having fun because you get to promote this book.
But the one thing I always felt, and I can visualize so many occasions with Cajun,
Yeah.
that he said to me
Mm-hmm.
was, stop, take your time. It's okay. I mean, I know that sounds simplistic, but I don't feel that my other dogs say that to me. He did. He'd look at me. I would be stressing,
Right.
and I'd be in the car and I'd look around. I'd have this stressed out, and he'd look at me and he would say to me, I felt,
Yeah.
you just take your time. It's okay. Just slow up,
See,
slow up.
he's this wise soul. And when you said about the other dogs would never say that, that's because they're different. So they
Right,
might say, like, are you going to eat that?
right,
I would really like that.
right,
They're so different.
right,
And they're different with different people. So, when I work
right.
with couples, I just worked with a couple and one of their pets. And like I end with, what would your dog like you to know? And he's something really philosophical with this one person going
Right,
on about, there was something about grief and going on about
right,
that. And then the other person, the dog is saying something about, time in the kitchen. And it's like, I'm sorry, it's not
right,
deeper, but this is what your dog is saying. And
right,
same dog, different person that they
right,
live with.
right,
So yes, your other dogs are talking to you. Maybe not as much. If I
right,
talk to one dog today, it might tell me 5 things, and tomorrow it might say nothing.
right,
Or they always say something, not very, but
right,
it's like people who we share
right.
what we want to share and when and with who.
I think it's not just what we bring to them. Oh, uh, what does Cajun need or another dog need? It's what they bring to us.
Yeah, and
And
if we if we look at it is that what they bring to us, oh, he's teaching me about resilience. He was in Hurricane
right,
Katrina. It was awful. We can assume that, but I don't think that's what he was really bringing you. I
yeah,
think that all that other stuff about his going with the flow and, oh, I met you today. Oh, I met
right.
you. And not being, there's multitude of things that
But that's what fascinates me about what you do. Because to me, no, seriously, to me, it was what Cajun had to say to me, which is what you have an intuitive ability to capture. But very few of us, I mean, I don't know anybody else who, I've never met anybody like you bring that you, if you had known Cajun, you could have helped me to decipher what he was saying to me. As much as I loved him and he loved me, and as close as we were, um, I can't say that I always knew what he was saying to me. So it, it to me, when I heard about you and
Mhm.
what your gift is, had so much more import.
Oh,
Um, no, because you could make that love stronger. You could give a
yes.
better life to and with that dog, which is not to say that I feel guilty. Cajun had and I had a wonderful love story, but I would have liked to have had your kind of insight into what is he telling you? Because I ask that question all the time, and it's a gift. Like I've never met anybody who had that, you know. And as much
Well,
as I've said, I've always had animals. I never had that.
yeah. So I have a question for you then. Thank you for all that. It I do want to help people. And I mean, clearly that's my why. I want to help
Yeah.
people have that bond. But when you talk about canceling the appointments with the vet
Oh
because
God.
you knew something, because I had a dog, and I remember saying to my family, the vet's on his way, and they were like,
Oh,
what? And I'm like, it's time. It's I know it's time. And I think that, and it was time, because there are times where people are just, it's never going to be time, but someone has to sort of lead that call. But you canceled it because you had some knowing. You had to have had a knowing sense.
I
Whether
still feel
Can
guilty.
you talk about that? You still feel guilty?
I do. I think about it not every day. And Cajun died 2.5 years ago, but I think
Mm-hmm.
about it a lot. You know, could he have lived longer? Did I do the right thing? It's my own guilt
Yeah.
because it was a struggle for him, struggle it. And I hated that I put him, or I didn't put him through the struggle, but that I wasn't willing to let go. At the same time, I feel terribly guilty that I just wanted him to die on his own, in his sleep.
Yes.
That's it,
Yes.
it was
Don't
awful.
we all want that?
Yes, I'd
So
like it for myself.
I
But
had a
at the
cat.
same
Yes.
time, as a human being,
Yeah.
if I were in that condition, and I've told my kids that, shoot me, take me out and shoot me, just don't make me suffer. So, but when you love someone else or a dog so much,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I still have guilt that I don't know. So what you're saying is,
I mean, it's a very profound time in life when
yes,
you're confronted with this time of a transition. And in generalities, what I find is that the dogs never want anyone carrying around guilt. And what they usually do
oh,
is have some kind of message of, and not everyone wants to connect, so that's another thing for listeners. You don't have
right.
to connect, but just knowing that dogs typically, no, not typically, I've never had a dog say, yeah, you messed up,
Yeah,
it's never
yeah,
been like that in
yeah,
the case I've done. It's always
yeah,
about something more. And so I think the process of grief, dealing with grief, and examining why we have that guilt, that the dogs, it's more about us. And
true.
so I just want to share that both to you and for listeners, um,
That's
because
true.
it's more about us and why are we holding on to that grief.
True.
Because if he had lived another 20 years, you would
Yeah,
still, there still comes a time where an animal's going to cross over.
true. Well, and also, and this may sound awful, but I would rather, if I had passed away before Cajun,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I would not want to think about his suffering
Mm-hmm.
of losing me. I mean,
Right.
not that I was sick, but that I'm just saying sometimes you have to think about that side of it too, which tells you something that, when it is time, I mean, we're not immortal. So when it is time, and, it definitely Cajun, at the end of his life, his struggle was so dire, and his lack of self-respect. He was incontinent. He couldn't get up.
Right.
When he got up, he would fall unless the lack of self-respect, I think, says something to all of us. That's not how we want to go. So, whether it's time or whatever, it doesn't mean I still don't feel horribly that I had to see the end and be the person who said, okay, it is time. Um,
Yeah.
but I do know that I would want that for myself. So that's where the guilt comes in. You got to let it go, because that's what you would want for yourself and the people and things you care for.
That's right. That's right. But letting it go is not an easy thing. And it's not something that I think we should add more guilt to. Like, oh, I'm
Right.
supposed to let it go. I should have let it go last week, but I still had. I thought I let it go.
Right.
So,
Right.
they can share what they can, bits of
Yes.
pieces, but then it's still up to the people to decide or be able to,
Yes.
sort of put it down. And when I'm done receiving something and sharing it, it's always like it's a breath. And
Yes.
it's that breath of letting it go that way, that we don't need to carry the guilt. We can still miss them and all of that,
Yes.
but feeling guilty as if we actually,
Right.
it's like we're thinking we're in charge. We don't know
That's
that
true.
he might not have passed away the next 10 minutes or something.
No, that's true. That's just part of life. It's sad, but it's also that you had such a great opportunity and privilege of having that in your life.
That's right. So that's what makes the book so great,
Yeah.
because you have these stories. And that's also why I feel compelled. I could sit around and talk to dogs all day. And
Right.
I get clients, I get referrals. I could do just that. And I remember I was sitting right here and I was like, I can't just do this. I need to do more with this information that I'm getting. And part of that are the
Really.
dog stories, and that people want. I mean, I didn't know Cajun, but I was like, oh, what's next? Oh gosh. Yeah, I understand that. I can relate. I'm in community with you about knowing what it's like to not let go.
The other thing to me was how important it is to rescue.
Yes.
That's like that, it's not the essence of the story, but it is in part. Like, I just cannot imagine not rescuing, a pet.
Yeah.
If a pet is coming into, whether it's one of my kids' lives, or it's always, oh, please, there are all these wonderful dogs, cats, donkeys.
Right. There
And so
are.
the rescue part to me was a very big part, because I had rescued dogs before and horses, but not formally, not through the animal shelter. It was either a dog left on the street, or one of my kids couldn't deal with a dog, or
Mhm.
so this was my first genuine experience of not having a dog or whatever dropped off at my feet. Um, and it is an extraordinarily awesome experience, because those dogs know it. They
Oh,
know it.
they do. That it seems like the next time, if anyone's listening, well, I know people are listening, but the people who are listening, the next time you want to get a dog, I want to propose to people, or if you know someone who is saying, oh, does anyone know where I could get this kind of a dog? Is like,
Right.
go to the animal shelter and
Yep.
allow yourself to be open and see if one comes to you and have that
Yep.
experience. Because some people don't even go. They'll say, oh, I could never go there. It's too sad. Well, I mean, there's a lot of dogs in animal shelters. In fact, we have many animal shelters in LA, but
Right.
there's a lot of good people there taking care of these dogs.
Yeah.
There's people who go in. I mean, we've got the photographers who go in, they take a treat that other people have sent donations. These dogs sit. They're
Yeah.
nice dogs. There's a lot of nice dogs there. So it's not that you have to be scared. Some of these dogs will be adopted tomorrow. Some of them will be rescued and placed
Right.
in homes. But there's a lot more than going to the shelter and knowing, oh, every dog is going to end up, euthanized. Some do, but a lot
Yeah.
of them are getting excellent care and would be a great fit for your house. So here's our plug to at least go try it. Go to a
Yeah.
shelter, allow yourself to see if a dog that you're looking for comes to you and you have that experience that you
Right.
did. And all mine came through rescues.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
I think that being open to, if we can plant a seed for people to be open to it, that
Right.
would be um, a good
But that
thing.
was a big part with Cajun, that he wouldn't have been who he was without having had gone through that horrendous experience and then being taken to a shelter and rescued. That was, as you said at the beginning of this, that was a part of his life.
You use the same word traumatic when you talk about the book that you wrote, that it, and
Oh,
so you did
very
it's
insightful.
somebody used the word about it being trauma, but the irony, as we talk about animals and their gifts, is that you
Hmm.
came through your own trauma with the help of who?
Right.
Cajun.
Yes.
Now Cajun has helped you get through a trauma too. So
Yes.
I love that. I didn't see that at first,
That's
but
very insightful. I didn't think of that. I mean, I knew, if you asked me to go back, if I were sitting in a therapist's office,
yeah.
but if you asked me to go back, this would be what would come out. But that's very insightful, because it's true. It's true. We had that in common, but it was also what he helped me get through, and as I helped him get through his
Yes.
own.
And you weren't
That's
even
very
aware of it.
insightful.
And I think that's why I love doing this, is that a lot of people, whether they have a session with me or
Yes.
they just look back on their own lives, we can connect the dots on the
Yes.
dogs as well, and how they're, whether communicating with us or just gifting us and teaching us
Right.
something. And if you hadn't been open to a shelter dog, you would have
Right.
not had this wonderful gift. So
But the
yes, that's
gift
a
is
plug
it.
for shelter dog.
Yeah, and the gift's ongoing, because
Yes.
if I look in the paper all the time, and when I was out at the shelter a few weeks ago, if there had been, I have two dogs. I really
Mhm.
don't need 3 or 4.
Right.
But if there had been the one that I felt was right for my dog family and human, I would have taken him or her.
Yeah.
So that's the ongoing gift that Cajun gave me too,
Yes.
that is a place that has need and
Hmm.
another gift. It's the ongoing thing. It's not just the one shot.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah,
Yes.
you have the ability with dogs, but probably also because of your background with children and education, those walls are critical to
They are.
begin to breach, especially now in 2020, 2021, and forever. Though it's a huge, it's not a small deal. It is the difference between how we all are going to live on this planet forever, whether it's with our dogs or the whales or people.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, that's
I
why I
really
do
respect
this.
what you do.
Yeah, I love when people get it and join the
Yeah,
wagon of
yeah.
what I'm trying to do. But I
Yeah,
love what
good.
you're doing to wrap up
Okay.
with the dog stories. That
Thank,
because I also want, I believe that as people connect with their dog stories,
yes,
and like in your own work with Cajun, I believe that you will come to have less grief and guilt
yes,
about his final days as you revisit the dog stories,
yes,
and that many of us connect more deeply with our dogs or any of our pets when we share those stories.
yes,
And that this the mission behind that is that when we if we share our dog stories, I believe that we are less likely to treat our dogs poorly because we are more connected to them and we are
right,
more connected to each other. And if we have to connect to each other through our dog stories, so be it.
right,
We just need to connect,
right.
or the shelters will continue to be
Good point.
overloaded and people will continue to be,
Right,
disconnected. So
right.
it's been lovely chatting with you.
Thank you so
So
much. I
much
had so
here.
much fun.
I just want to thank you. If people want to get your book, where can they get it?
Well, hopefully your local bookstore. I like to plug that even during a pandemic, but you can always buy it on Amazon.
Okay, but start with your local bookstore. They can get it to you, and definitely read it. I read it and loved it.
Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Thank you, Brooke Newman, for joining us at Talking with the Dogs, learning more about dogs, their stories, and what we can do to help them have their best lives. If you'd like to work with me, you can find me at talkingwiththedogs.com. You can book a session to find out what your dog wants or needs you to know. In the meantime, I hope you'll have a great day talking and listening to your dog. Thanks for tuning in to Talking with the Dogs. Hope today's episode made you want to understand your own dog better and appreciate that every dog has a story and something to say. Subscribe now for more dog stories and insights into animal communication and what it's like to be a dog whisperer. Review this episode on Apple Podcasts or follow Talking with the Dogs on Instagram or Facebook and sign up for a chance for you and your dog to be a guest on the show. Whatever you do, I hope you'll spend time talking with the dogs.